Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's international webinar. This is Boram Kim, an assistant program specialist at the International Information and Networking Center for Intangible Cultural Heritage in the Asia Pacific region under the auspices of UNESCO. You can call us ICHCAP. Today, ICHCAP and the Korea National University of Cultural Heritage and the UNESCO Bangkok office are co-hosting the third APHEN-ICH International Seminar on Diversity and Distinctiveness, looking into shared ICH in the Asia Pacific region. So, you might wonder what APHEN-ICH stands for. APHEN-ICH is the Asia Pacific Higher Education Network for Safeguarding Intangible Cultural Heritage that was launched in September 2018 to establish a cooperative system for development of higher education for ICH safeguarding. As of today, 19 higher education institutions are affiliated to the network. The first seminar of the APHEN-ICH was held in 2018. For the present edition, diversity of and shared ICH in the region would be the central theme, and featuring 12 presentations from scholars and experts on cultural heritage and relevant areas of study. So, to open the two-day seminar, I would like to invite today's keynote presenter, Professor Emeritus Baek Lee-dong. Baek Lee-dong teaches cultural anthropology at Hanyang University. He is currently serving as chairman of International Council of Museums for the Asia Pacific region and vice chairman of Blue Shield International. He is also the Vice Chairman of the Cultural Division of Korea National Commission for UNESCO and the head of the Institute of East Asian Archaeology. Once again, I would like to welcome Professor Baek Lee-dong. The floor is yours.
마이크를 소리 들려요? 소리 안 나오네.
International Intangible Cultural Heritage Symposium web seminar here. Please understand that I can speak English, but is the Hangul is Hangul. Korean is the most valuable intangible cultural heritage for Koreans and also for the world people as a very scientific language. So I have to use the Korean language, Hangul, 한국어, in my presentation. So please be understood, and all the interpreter will help you to understand my speech today. 사실 그 유형과 무형유산은 상호 하나의 문화의 두 개의 얼굴이라고 생각합니다. 첫 번째 프레젠테이션입니다. 저기 PPT. 그래서 각 형태에 따라서 고유한 의미와 기능이 있다고 생각합니다. 유산이라고 하는 것은 바로 인간의 과거의 경험이고 또 기억이자 당시에도 그 사회가 살아가야 하는 하나의 수단과 자원이었고 오늘날에는 우리가 살아가야 할 자원입니다. 그리고 각 집단의 문화 정체성을 표현하고 글로벌 사회가 반드시 지켜야 할 문화 다양성의 기반이라고 생각합니다. 다음 슬라이드. 한국에서도 무형문화유산에 대해서 오랫동안 관심을 가지고 보존 노력을 해왔습니다. 이제 20년을 넘은 전통문화대학교에도 무형문화유산 전공이 생기고 유네스코의 아태무형유산센터가 활약하고 있습니다. 오늘 이 자리에 있는 것도 한국의 그러한 노력에서 유래된 것이라고 생각합니다. 이러한 한국의 노력이 아시아 태평양 지역 사회의 문화적 풍요성 그리고 삶의 번영을 이룩하는 데 기여하기를 바람하지 않습니다. 다음 슬라이드. 무형문화유산의 보존은 현대와 같이 빠르게 변화하는 사회에서는 사라지기 마련입니다. 그래서 글로벌 사회는 가지고 있는 자원이 바로 인류의 보편적인 역사의 한 부분이라고 생각하여 잘 보존하고 미래의 우리 삶에 대비하는 자세가 필요할 것입니다. 그래서 보존의 방안을 강구하는 것이 시급한 일이며 보존은 바로 그 전통이 오늘날의 우리의 삶 속에서 살아서 다양한 모습으로 나타나게 만드는 것이 보존의 필수적인 전략일 것입니다. 다음 슬라이드. 아시아 태평양 지역은 문화적으로 연속성, 즉 공통성이 있고 다른 한편으로는 각 문화별로 고유한 개성을 가지고 있습니다. 이것은 이 지역의 인간의 역사가 긴 시간 동안 서로 영향을 주고받은 결과일 것입니다. 사람이 이동하고 문화가 전파되어 지역의 고유한 전통 문화와 새로이 도입된 문화가 융합되어 새로운 고유한 문화를 발전시켜 온 것입니다. 오늘의 주제인 오칠은 아주 대표적인 아시아 태평양 지역의 문화의 공통성과 지역성을 잘 보여주는 하나의 사례라고 할 수 있습니다. 중국의 대칠, 일본의 우루시, 한국의 오칠, 태국의 산마이 등등의 다양한 이름으로 불리고 독특한 모습을 가지고 있지만 오늘날 모두 오칠의 한 종류입니다. 자, 그렇다면 오칠을 어떻게 보존하고 발전시키는 것이 아스팍 지역의 공동 숙제이자 전략이 될 수 있을까요? 다음 슬라이드. 아시아 태평양 지역에서는 온나무가 널리 퍼져 있습니다. 그래서 옷봉에는 정착 생활이 시작되는 신석기 시대부터 있었을 것입니다. 이러한 사실은 이미 고고학 유적에서도 확인되었습니다. 양자강 유역의 유명한 허무투 신석기 유적에서 옷으로 가공한 나무 그릇이 발견되고 또 부분의 유적에서 또 배가 발견된 적이 있습니다. 이 옷봉에는
And this type
중국에서
of
문명
lacquer
초기에
craft
시작하여
has began
지속적으로
in
발전해서
the start of
한대의 칠기 문화는 그
China,
전성기에
the period
도달하였습니다.
in China,
이러한
and then
중국의
it has
칠기
flourished
문화의
during the Han
영향을 받아서
Dynasty.
한국과 일본
And
그리고
Korea,
베트남 등지에서도
Japan, and
일찍이
Vietnam
칠기 문화가 발전하였습니다.
has enjoyed this
중세에도
lacquer culture with the
태국의
expansion of
미얀마
Han
등지로
and
확산된
its
기록이 있습니다.
cultural diffusion to the regions.
그런데
We've
온나무가
also
가지는
seen this
다양한
expand from
기능을
Thailand
고려할 때
as well as
옷은
Myanmar. But what we
아마도
can say is
지역에
that
따라서는 신석기
lacquer,
시대부터
starting
사용되기
from the
시작하였을 것으로
Neolithic
보입니다.
age, probably has flourished
옷은
altogether around the
나무나
world.
다른 재질을 가공하고
Lacquer is about
가공하여
processing
그릇이나
wood
가구를
to
만드는
create
용도뿐 아니고
furniture as well as dishware, but that is
접착제나
not all.
또는
It's also
방부제,
used as
방습제로서
adhesives
그
and also
기능이
used
있고
to find a way
또한
to
약용으로도 널리
reduce
사용되고 있는 것을
humidity,
볼
and
때
it can also be used for
그거 지역의
medicine.
주변에 분포된 온나무가
Therefore, lacquer trees that
까다롭게
surrounds the
피부병을
villages
유발해서 까다롭기는 하지만
is a bit sensitive because it may lead to rashes. However, we do understand that there were many areas where it was applied. So in the Asia-Pacific region,
문화적인 적응이라고 할 수 있을 것입니다.
I believe that the lacquer culture indicates a creative acculturation of different and unique technical artistic developments of the lacquer culture. This is a picture of the lacquer tree. This is a distribution of the toxic condendron, the poison ivy, and you also see the map of China as well as the topology of China. And in such a circumstance, we've seen various artifacts. The oldest evidence of ochre at the Neolithic site, and it was used as adhesives. Ever since people started to settle, ever since we've seen Neolithic sedentism, it was important that the people understood the plants and the trees surrounding them, and I think that that has led to a type of lacquer culture to flourish. We've seen a diversity in lacquer crafts, and in Asia Pacific, you can see that it takes on various form and shape. If you look at the left, this is the Dajeon Chilgi of Korea, and you see in the center is China's example, where it has a very thick lacquer layer to create a dishware. And we have urushi the box of Japan, which is very fancy, and we see the lacquer craft of Myanmar. And not only that, we see an icon of St. Mary's during the medieval times. This indicates that lacquer was used around the world in our everyday lives, and it was also used for decorative artwork. Next slide, please. As I have already mentioned, lacquer craft is a combination of science, technology, as well as arts. There was a scientific mystery of conserving organic material. It also had to do with moisture control, antibacterial components, adhesives, and it also was noted to prevent electronic waves. It has a shining and smooth texture, surface, and culture for artistic expression, and that has led to the high society utilize this material in their everyday life, in their living arts. It was highly appreciated by that high society. The next slide indicates an artifact, a mummy that was found in the Sangte region of China. You can see that it's very well preserved, and we were able to understand that lacquer was used to preserve this mummy. As far as I know, even the blood vessels were preserved in its original form. It's also used for these items and the personal equipment at war, and the 황칠 or 황칠 type of attire was found in Korea. Not only that, there are medicinal purposes to lacquer if we look at the Encyclopedia of Korean Medicine in the past. Not only that, it is very articulate in various artwork because it enhances the functionalities of the product itself, and it can also make it beautiful. So way back, lacquer was noted as a mysterious material that would enhance any particular item or aspect of that product. There are something that we really need to note in lacquer artwork, which has to do with the process of producing the product. You can see that there are various ways to produce and to extract the sap, and there is an overall chain that enables these lacquer work to be put together. And you can see that it involves various genres. And we can also say that it's a comprehensive form of art that involves various disciplines, and it also expands. It also expands the scope of artwork. It's also a type of traditional culture. And in this vastly changing modern society, sometimes it can disappear, it can be eliminated. Therefore, I believe that it's important to understand that this is a critical element of our modern society, and we have to respond accordingly. And conservation and preservation is something that has to be a part of our everyday life because it's about preserving the form of cultural heritage to move on and to diversify. The Asia-Pacific region has many commonalities, but it also has regional uniqueness. For a very long period of time, it has impacted each other's cultures, and that has led to creating a very unique form of culture. So in the case of lacquer, we can see that there are both a commonality as well as a diversity amongst the regions. There's also a uniqueness aspect to it. So as a cultural heritage of humanity, we need to understand and we need to identify ways to preserve such cultural heritage.
Sorry, I lost it. 문제는 현대적으로 활용할 수 있는 새로운 기능을 창출하는
So
것이
in the future, I believe that it's important to add additional functionalities to lacquer to have it preserved in the modern society. So it's important to understand the characteristics of lacquer, meaning that we need to find a way to analyze the material and to expand the applications of lacquer. I believe that this is a key strategy going forward so that we can use this in our modern society. We can expand the applications which will help it live on.
이옷 자체가
And not only that,
요즘
lacquer, or ochil, as we call it in Korea, can be a new art form. It can be used in art, in the arts, to have it be promoted in the value that it can provide to humanity. So believe that we need to find a way to specialize this particular material or resource.
거기 앞그림인 것 같아요.
And if you refer to the slide,
원이 많은 저기 슬라이드를 좀 보여주세요.
could you please pull up the slide with the circles?
원이 많은 13번째 거.
I believe it's page 13. And if you look at this slide, in the modern society, we can utilize lacquer in many ways. We can, of course, traditionally we used it as adhesives, as dishware. However, in the future, in the modern society, I think that there are many ways to utilize lacquer. We need to find a strategy to diversify the applications of lacquer. And this also has to do with finding a way to converge these different lacquer cultures and to develop this into a new type or new form. Not only that, it's also about applying oat or lacquer to new modern cultural forms. Therefore, the functions that were used, or in other words, the applications in the past can be modified in the future. And I believe joint research on ways to expand the application that befits the demands of the modern society is something that can be very useful. And based on such research, we can enable this culture to expand in Asia. And it can be unfamiliar to those in the Western world. And what I want to say is because this is a beautiful type of cultural heritage, we can have new markets open, especially in the West. So understanding and identifying new cultural demand and to make inroads into the markets in the West can be something that we can tap into in the Asia Pacific. These lacquer artwork and craft work is therefore something that needs to be preserved. We need to find a way to engage in cultural convergence to create new forms, new modes, and also create new demand. It also has to do with creating new forms of this artwork and this heritage. Academic seminars can be key. We can exchange information in the process, and not only that, expos or exhibitions can also be a good channel to bring together many people and to showcase the lacquer culture to have it receive the limelight. We can share information and also create new ideas in these venues and platforms, and that's why I want to suggest expos and exhibitions on lacquer. It has a scientific merit to it, and there's also an aesthetic aspect to lacquer. And these can be brought together to create a new type of global culture. I believe this is the right strategy forward. And because it's a common culture of the Asia Pacific and because it has its uniqueness, if we understand ways to do this, it can be a great way for us to expand this culture around the world. Next, I would like to move on to slide 15. This is the Tongyang Ochil Museum, and Professor Kim Sung-soo is front of this painting using lacquer. Professor Kim Sung-soo is very well known as a lacquer artist. He's trying his best to expand this culture around the world. And what you see here in the middle is how lacquer can be used in our everyday life. There are many applications, and one is in the elevator. You can see that mother of pearl is used in this lacquer artwork. It's about embedding lacquer to our everyday life. How can we do this better? Is something I hope we can discuss at at this seminar because it is something that's necessary to preserve lacquer heritage going forward. Once again, uchir or lacquer art is unique to Asia. It is a type of high-end culture that impacts our everyday life as well as the arts, and we can also call it an iconic cultural heritage of Asia, and it also has to do with a universal cultural heritage that impacts the Asia Pacific. Preserving such culture and developing this culture is key because it can create jobs in this digital world. And not only that, it can enhance our quality of life. We can see that this is a traditional culture that involves scientific techniques. Once again, uchir arts has its own uniqueness depending on the country, but once again, we can say that this is an icon of Asian Pacific cultural tradition and diversity. In creating an inclusive society in this global world where inclusion is key, I think that uchir offers an important message of cultural diversity and prosperity, which is very well aligned with today's seminar. Uchir arts will open up a new frontier, and for those that are tired of the digital world, uchir or the lacquer arts will be providing a new sentiment to the world's people. So with that, let me conclude my presentation. Thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you, Professor Choi Kong-ho and Director General Kim Ki-young for the invitation, and I wish you the best of luck.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you for your insightful presentation, Professor Emeritus Baek-gi-dong. So without further ado, I would like to introduce today's session moderator, Professor Choi Kong-ho. Professor Choi Kong-ho served as the president of the Korea Art History Association, the general director of the Cheongju International Craft Biennale, and an advisory committee member of the Blue House, Ministry of Culture and Tourism Cultural Heritage Administration as well. He is currently a professor at the Department of Intangible Cultural Heritage Studies of the Korea National University of Cultural Heritage. Once again, I would like to welcome Professor Choi Kong-ho for moderating.
네, 여러분 안녕하십니까? 예, 아펜이치 대표를 맡고 있는 무형유산학과의
My name is Choi Kong-ho. I've just been introduced
기조강연해
by
주신
here, APHEN-ICH, part of the Korea National University of Cultural Heritage. And I would like to once again thank Professor Baek-gi-dong for being the keynote speaker. I have to say that I really have great faith in the statement that all culture is a hybrid, because culture is like water, and that when water is pooled in one place, it will rot. And it needs to continue to flow to be healthy. And I think this is very similar with culture. And that is something that we've seen throughout history, which is why closed monoculture is less vibrant than a diverse multiculture. And that flexibility is something that leads to the sustainability of the human community. In fact, I think that this current COVID pandemic is a testament to this. We have to embrace the diversity that really respects all differences, and we have to cooperate together because we are a joint community. And I think that today's theme, Diversity and Distinctiveness, looking into shared ICH in the Asia Pacific, is very relevant in that regard. And I think that lacquer and lacquerware are a great theme where we can find commonalities across the Asia Pacific. We do have many presenters today, discussants. I would like to thank all of the participants also who are joining us online. There are 5 presentations that are going to be given over 2 hours. I would like to ask you to really listen hard to the presentations and to the themes that they symbolize. I think that it's not going to be enough time for us to go through all the presentations and discussions within this limited time. But if time allows, I'd like to also take some questions from the floor. We will take your questions by text. So we'll move on to the first presentation. This first presentation will be given by Jae-ho Lee on the subject of historical change of Korean lacquerware and Najeon
박사
craft.
과정을 마친 뒤에
Mr. Lee received a master's degree in art history. He has worked as a curator at the National Museum of Korea, and currently he is studying at our university, the National University of Cultural Heritage. You can begin now, sir.
네. 소리 잘 들리십니까?
Can you hear me?
안녕하십니까?
Hello.
아시아태평양 무형유산 고등교육네트워크 국제.
It is a pleasure for me to be here at this international seminar of APHEN-ICH, and it is a great honor for me as well. I'm going to use this time to go over the history of Korean lacquerware and lacquer craft,
한국 오칠의 역사를 훑어보고
present an overview of that to you today and how the technology is being passed down and transmitted.
관계를
And I want to talk about the relationship that Korean lacquer craft has with lacquer across the Asia-Pacific region.
그 인간이 사용했던 도구는 어떤 인간이
I believe that when we look across history, humans have made great progress by using tools. Some of the first tools that humans used were stones and wood, and the stones were later used to make earthenware. The earthenware, however, had some faults because they would continue to absorb moisture and they would not be able to contain liquid. Earthenware has evolved into glazed ceramic. However, in the case of Korea, we have seen lacquer technique that was developed highly. Lacquer technique is very difficult to master because you have to handle lacquer sap at the risk of skin disease, and you have to create the right environment for the hardening process. So it's a very difficult material to use with. However, across East Asia, many people have used lacquer technology in many regions from the Neolithic age because they knew the advantages and the merits of lacquer. And I think that this is something that is familiar to all of the experts present here today. In West Asia and Europe, typically they used varnishes that mixed drying oil and resin, whereas in East Asia, many artisans use lacquer instead as a basic varnish. This shows us that lacquer is seen as a great material and technology, and they represent the commonality of Asian culture. We've just heard from Professor Emeritus Bae in his keynote speech about the brief history of lacquer craft in Korea. But just to give you another repeat of that, there are in Korea 6 species of the lacquer tree currently remaining. The chamot tree in particular, the chamot tree is used widely in lacquer craft. In Southeast Asia, I understand that they use another kind of tree that produces a darker form of lacquer sap. So the species might be different, and the technologies used might be different, but across all of the Asian countries, these technologies were grown and developed in an organic sense. Here you would see a relic that was unearthed from the 4000 and 5000 BC era from the Hamudu ruins in Yuyao in Zhejiang province in China. On the right-hand side, this is from the Kakinoshima site in Hokkaido in Japan. It's a vessel, as you can see, and on the surface of this, there's red lacquer, red pigment. The red lacquer was used to give it this vibrant red color, and this dates back to 7000 BC. So as you can see, this is a very old vessel, and they were unearthed in 2 regions that are very geographically far away from each other. However, this shows us that in the Neolithic era, many Asian countries all had these traditions that were grown organically in their own respective countries. In the case of Korea, it is also similar. From the Neolithic era, it is believed that earthenware and lacquerware have been used. Recently, this Shinan site and Kodae site revealed much red lacquerware that date back to about 3000 BC. As you can see, this red earth, the red earth was used to create this earthenware, and lacquer was brushed on top of this earthenware. This is something that we were able to see. Across Northeast Asia, this lacquer culture had developed very organically since the Neolithic era. And then later on, in historic times, many of the Asian countries engaged in interactions with each other, exchange, and that actually led to even more development of lacquer craft. Before the Three Kingdoms period in Korea, there are two archaeological major sites that unearth these lacquer wares. This is a site in Dahori in Changwon of Korea, dates back to the 1st century BC. You could see sheaths, handles of Korean-style bronze dagger, vessels for rites such as bowls and plates, and ceremonial goods as well. Many techniques can be discovered here. In some cases, lacquerware is painted directly on the surface of the wood base. This is a technique called 목심칠기. In some cases, the lacquer is done on ceramics, or in some cases, the lacquer is brushed on top of strips of bamboo. These relics that you're seeing right now were unearthed in Gwangju, in a site that we call Shincheondong. The one that you see on the middle, that's a bowl, and there's lacquer there, lacquer sap. This was a bowl that contained lacquer sap for artisans to use to make lacquerware. And the lacquer spatula that you see on the right, it was used to make lacquerware and also to get the lacquer sap from the lacquer trees. So these different tools and crafts show us that at least in the 4th century BC, a lot of these crafts were developed in earnest. Through research, we're able to see that this lacquerware that was used, the lacquer that was used at the time, is not that viscous. There were many coats of lacquer that was brushed on top, maybe about 4 to 5 coats. On the right-hand side, you would see the photograph of polarized light. The layers of the lacquer are quite distinct. This is something that we were able to see in the early Bronze era. And this is good evidence that tells us that lacquerware was used in earnest in Korea. These are some relics that were found in Pyongyang, and this shows us that these are Chinese lacquerware that have been imported to Korea by way of Pyongyang. And in this case, they use very thick layers of lacquer using some cloth fabric, and in some cases, hemp would be placed on top of wood with lacquer coats coated on top of that. What is very characteristic here is this cup with ears. The cup with ears has been variously studied and researched, and this shows us that this cup with ears reveals a technique that was not necessarily used in Korea at the time. If you look at the bottom, on the bottom of this cup, and when we did an in-depth analysis of the layers on the bottom of the cup, you would see that there are an extra layer of undercoating directly on the wood. This is a technique that is typical of the Chinese technique during this period, the Chinese Han Dynasty, where they use undercoating, and then on top of the undercoat, they would create the main coat, brush the main coat of lacquer, and then coat the exterior of the cup. This is a technique that is characteristic of the Han Dynasty. We don't know whether this was imported from China or whether somebody in Korea went to study or went to learn about lacquer art in China and then came back to Korea and made this, but we know that Chinese art directly influenced Korean lacquer art as well. In the Three Kingdoms period, they continued to transmit and uphold the tradition that was evident in the earlier periods, in the Bronze period and etc. And also they received a lot of influences from Tang Dynasty in China. From the left-hand side, you would see 고구려 art, then Shilla art, and Baekje art. From the 5th century to the 6th century. You would see that there are many different kinds of lacquer art there. These lacquer crafts, many of them were commissioned by the royal court. So the king and his family would typically commission these crafts. Many of these lacquer crafts were typically produced for the upper classes, and in fact, they were a symbol of someone's prestige and wealth. We also have some relics that have been unearthed from the tomb of King Wurung, such as a lacquered coffin that you see on the left and the king's footrest on the right. And these are also evidence of the particular characteristics at the time. On the bottom, you would see the photographs show that there was no use of hemp cloth there, that the lacquer was placed directly on the wooden surface, but the wooden surface was kept very flat and very smooth before the lacquer was coated on. The layers of lacquer varnish are very thin. You would see here on the right-hand side that the layers are quite distinct. We can see through this that the lacquer paint, the lacquer was more refined in this time. During the unified Shilla period, we were able to see more transparent layers of lacquer, and the black and the red colors therefore were made to pop even more, and the lacquer was refined even further to use as a priming coat. In fact, in some cases, they would use bone powder and then apply a priming coat more than twice, using the different kinds of fine powder. There is a pond called Wolji Pond in the city of Gyeongju in Korea. These different relics have been unearthed there, and they can tell us the kinds of very sophisticated techniques that were available in Korea at the time. Together with the lacquer craft, Tang China was influential in bringing about another decorative technique called tang, where they hammer flat pieces of gold leaf and silver leaf and use them as decorative patterns on top of the surface, and then have that lacquered. In Korea, they started using these sheets of silver and gold, but later they used mother of pearl inlay. The mother of pearl inlay lacquer craft is something that really represents the essence of Korean art, but much of this was brought in through influence from Chinese art. During the Goryeo dynasty, there aren't many crafts that we were able to unearth, not many relics that we were able to find during that time, but with the few that we have, we were still able to understand the techniques there. And around this time, during the Goryeo dynasty, there was a lot of interchange and inter-exchange with China and Japan. And there was even a government workshop, a central government workshop, where artisans and craftsmen would work on making lacquerware. And they would typically create very sophisticated, very advanced techniques. They would make cups used by the upper class, sometimes also religious vessels that were used in memorial rites. And in fact, there were some wooden utensils that were lacquered that were used by members of the common class, but many of them have been lost in our records. Most of the lacquer craft were typically used by the upper class, and that is something that we're able to see through historical evidence and records. During the Goryeo dynasty, we see a lot of the technique called 목심절기, where fabric is layered on the surface of wood base. The wood base is typically too thin, and so they cannot be assembled using nails. So adhesives would be used, such as glue or glue derived from fish, and then fabric would be used to cover it. This flower-shaped cup, as you can see, we did an X-ray photograph of this flower-shaped cup, and if you take a look inside, you would see a very thin layer of wood and it has been lacquered. On these photographs that you see of the polarized light and transmitted light on the bottom, there's the underpaint and the main paint. There are very distinct layers of the different coats of lacquer paint. So this also shows us that the level of technique was quite high. This bowl set is also similar. You would see that a very thin piece of wood has been curved to create the shape, and hemp was coated on top, and then the entire end result was lacquered. So it's a very delicate kind of technique that was used here. In the Korean dynasty, what we see here is a lacquer incense box. So it's a box that would be used to contain incense. And this was decorated with many different kinds of motifs. We can only see it in this black and white photograph. The very thin layers have been very much destroyed. However, we are able to take these little photographs to study the decorations and the motifs. There was silk placed and some lacquer coats placed on top of that using bone powder, and the coats will be repeated 2 or 3 times to give them a very nice sheen and a nice varnish. The layers of the lacquer will be placed on top of each other consecutively, and on the upper coat of the lacquer, there was gold powder that was dusted on top of that, which is very similar to the makie technique that was used in Japan. So we would see that there are very transparent coats of lacquer that were placed consecutively on top, which would allow this to really reflect a lot of the light, giving it a very decorative beauty. Take a look at these photographs and cross sections of the epi-illumination microscope. This is where a sea turtle's back, the shell, the tortoise shell, would be lightly carved and used as a decorative emblem here. The red ink, the red dyes can still be seen. On the left-hand side, you would see that gold powder has been used to create that bird shape. And that bird shape on the right-hand picture, you would see it's a very thin layer on top. So each of the layers are very distinctive, and each of the layers have a light reflective capacity, which would really allow the light to play off the surface of this particular relic. The Najeon Chilgi of Goryeo shows delicate and elaborate composition of patterns as well. Shu Ji-hui, an envoy of North Song Dynasty, visited Gaegyeong, and he said that the applying lacquer in Korea is inferior to that of China or Song Dynasty, but the decorative technique using mother of pearl is very highly sophisticated. That is what the Chinese envoy said. At the time, Goryeo dynasty might not have been very sophisticated in using lacquer itself, but it was very highly skilled in using mother of pearl. Typically, the patterns and the motifs that were used in Najeon Chilgi of Goryeo would be formed by cutting each component of patterns in small pieces and combining them. Many flower motifs are used, such as lotuses, chrysanthemums, and peonies. The size of each pattern is less than 1 centimeter, and the smallest one is only 2 to 3 millimeters. So these are very tiny little pieces of shells, but once they are put together by the artisan and by the craftsman, they will create very decorative designs and patterns. At this time, you have to remember that the artisans did not have many tools. They didn't have wire saws or small hand saws, so they could just use their hands to cut the small shells and seashells and abalone shells. These artisans were able to create a sort of very elegant and very refined lacquer craft art. Later, it is known that the Empress of Yuan Dynasty in China requested that Najeon lacquer boxes from Korea be sent to her to house Buddhist scriptures. In fact, about 10 pieces of the boxes of Najeon scriptures remaining in the world can also be related to this request by the Chinese Empress. For instance, this is being kept at the British Museum in London. It's a sutra holder with the Mother mother of pearl inlay.
조선시대 칠기공예는 어떤
In the Joseon Dynasty,
어떤 제작과
they
사용의
wanted
저변을
to
더 넓히는 방향으로
expand the base of production and use and vary its own techniques based on the techniques that they inherited from Goryeo. Until the middle of the Joseon Dynasty, these master artisans who made lacquer craft and mother of pearl inlay were subordinated to the central and local government workshops. So these artisans would be mindful of the past traditions, but they were also very innovative in the use of lacquer craft and mother of pearl. If we take a look at the relics, we would see in some cases lacquer is applied directly to wood without the use of hemp, and the layers tend to be very thin, and in some cases they only brush 1 or 2 layers instead of 4 or 5 in the past. So it's a very simplified technique that they're using the Joseon Dynasty. This could be because there was more demand for lacquer, so they were trying to use less of the lacquer sap. And also, they wanted to really show off more of the wooden details, the grain of the wood more so than the lacquer. So it's also an aesthetic reason as well. In the Joseon Dynasty, this particular work that you see here, this lacquered comb box, is characteristic of the Joseon Dynasty's art. This is a comb box where women would use to keep their combs or various different articles that they would use in their dresser. You could see the box is a little bit bigger than we would see in the Goryeo Dynasty, and the decorations are also a little bit bigger as well. But the decorations, they've been hammered flat. And when they've been hammered flat, these cracks appear on the surface of the shells, but the cracks are also a part of the decoration. In the Joseon Dynasty, we would see that the craftsmen would try to use and keep the materials in their essential sense. In the 19th century, the shells would be sliced even thinner to create even these straight lines, as you can see. Through these technological advancements, this led to the total overall cost and the price of the lacquer craft going down and demand going up as well. Many artisans have started manufacturing these to the end of Joseon. There are many workshops that we were able to find across Korea, and these lacquer crafts were developed currently up to the 20th century. Many artisans became artists later on. In 1921, Chun Sung-gyu was a master artisan who was very prominent in his field. He introduced a fret saw for cutting the mother of pearl. You can see he was inheriting the traditional art techniques, but he was also trying something new. Kim Bong-yong is another artisan. This is a design that he created in the early 1900s. This is around the time when Korea was moving into the era of modernity. In 1952, there was a mother of pearl inlay lacquerware training institute that was established in Gyeongsangnam-do province. On the left picture, you would see a portrait of Kim Bong-yong and Yu Kang-yeol, who were also the masters and teachers who worked at this training institute. They would offer training and education. And Kim was also a professor at Hongik University. This training institute was very active, and even now, the training institute artisans the graduates continue to do active work in the field. This is a small dining bowl that was made by Kim Bong-yong. You can see that the materials are quite refined, but the designs are a little bit more contemporary.
한국의 오칠의 어떤 그 채취와 정제 기술에 대해서는 간략하게 소개를
In Korea, this is typically the process used to get the lacquer sap. So first, the bark is stripped off a lacquer tree, and then these horizontal scars are made on the tree, and to tap into the sap inside. I think this is very similar, a similar technique that is used across Asia. So from June to September, the sap is harvested. In July and August, this flourishing lacquer from these 2 months are typically seen as the highest quality lacquer.
하지만 그 모든 그 채취가 끝나고 난 뒤에도 여기를 물에 담궈
After the sap is all harvested, in some cases they are used to make hwachi, where the remaining lacquer sap is gathered and they are burned. And because heat has been added to this sap, they cannot be hardened properly. However, these hardened hwachi sap has still been used without leaving no room for waste in many cases of lacquer craft art.
여러 가지 정제와 기술 정제 기술
Many of these refining techniques
실장이라는 어떤
are currently used and being transmitted right now under the name of 칠기장.
특히 조선 시대의 낮은 칠기 특징 중에 하나인
During the Joseon dynasty, one of the characteristics of the lacquerware that was used were transparent layers of lacquer is continuously applied on the woodenware. You can see that process depicted here in the photos, where the transparent coats of lacquer are continuously applied on and then wiped off and then added on again. And this is a tradition that we're still seeing in Korea. Another thing that we're seeing, this tradition is where opaque lacquer is added to the woodenware, where the first raw lacquer is applied, then hemp, then another coat of opaque lacquer, and in the end, use a cinnabar lacquer, and you rub it with the water, and then you polish it. And this technique is currently transmitted down to students to this day.
마지막으로 이제 한국의 어떤
Lastly, I want to talk about
그 오칠 관련된 무형유산의
the
보호 측면에서
process of how we safeguard and preserve lacquer crafts technology in Korea. And by that, I want to talk about how these cultural heritage, these were first designated. In 1975, the cutting technique was designated as important national tangible cultural heritage following 1966, when 나전칠기장, artisan of mother of pearl lacquer, was the first to be designated as a national important and tangible cultural heritage. We can see that although Somokjang, cabinet makers, was also designated as an important national and tangible cultural heritage in 1975, the 나전칠기, or mother of pearl lacquerware, was designated first among lacquer-related techniques because it emphasized the comprehensive technology of making complete 나전 lacquerware. This shows us that in Korea there was a recognition that the 나전칠기 is really a representative of Korean art. In the National Museum of Korea, you would be able to see lacquer crafts from various Asian countries. This is from the China Gallery, the red lacquered bowl with the lid, or in Japan, the lacquered inkstone vase using maki technique, or the Cambodian relic, lacquerware inlaid with mother of pearl. These can all be found in the National Museum of Korea. We can see that Asian lacquer culture is so deep, and the aesthetics are a little bit different across countries, but the essence of the material of lacquer can still be seen across all of these different items. Across the technology of lacquer and use of the materials, some of the processes are similar in that you need to have a very deep understanding of nature itself. So I believe that having this documentation and inventorying of such traditions is very important because it helps us to honor the tradition. By archiving and inventorying and keeping records of all of these different transmission activity and traditions, that will be very helpful for us to continue this tradition into the years. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. The 나전칠기 in Korea, or lacquerware using mother of pearl inlay, has been the topic of Mr. Lee's presentation. So thank you very much. We'll now move on to the second presentation.
The next presentation will be by Yuji Yonehara, Director of the Center for Innovation and Traditional Industries at Kyoto Seika University. The topic of his presentation is Urushi lacquer in Japan, restoration of cultural properties and the cultural state of urushi production. This presentation and the presentation by our guest from Myanmar was recorded in advance, so let us now begin the presentation.
Director of the Center for Innovation in Traditional Industries at Kyoto Seika University. I am honored to be with you today. My presentation will aim to summarize the current state of urushi lacquer in Japan. Just to note, I will be using the word urushi when speaking about Japanese lacquer. First, there are two major categories of urushi craft in Japan. One is for dishware and other household items, as well as decorative artworks. The other is for repair and the restoration of buildings that are designated traditional cultural properties. In this presentation, I will be focusing on the latter. In 2050, the Agency for Cultural Affairs in Japan determined that only domestically produced urushi will be used for all future repairs of buildings under the national designation of important cultural property or national treasure. 2.2 tons of domestically produced urushi is needed annually. However, at the moment, production sites are not able to meet this demand. Of the total amount of urushi currently being consumed in Japan, less than 2% are domestically produced, while dishware and other daily items rely heavily on imported lacquer from China. Imports can no longer be used for important cultural properties due to the new decision. Securing enough land to plant urushi trees is another critical issue. It takes about 50 years for an urushi tree to mature for harvest, and the total amount of urushi unrefined lacquer that can be tapped from a single tree is amount to 100 milliliters. Urban development has diminished the size of agricultural land, the expanded residential areas, making it difficult to plant new urushi forests to be cut down in 15-year cycles. To secure land for planting, it is necessary to receive support from the local administration. The protection of important cultural properties in Japan directly hinges on the establishment of an appropriate systems of production for sufficient yield of domestic lacquer in the future. To achieve this, it is vital to approach the challenge from a multidisciplinary perspective, examining relevant issues within the fields of urban development, natural employment, and the maintenance of traditional industry as a whole. To harvest urushi, grooves are carved into the bark of the lacquer tree and the sleeping sap are collected from the skirts. This process is known as urushi-kaki, literally lacquer scraping, and it was practiced in farming villages across Japan in the past. As this was seasonal work, limited to the months between June and August, farmers would often harvest urushi during their off-season as a means of earning supplemental income. In regions where urushi tapping thrived, urushi forests were planted around the farmland. The most common method of urushi tapping in Japan is to completely harvest the sap in one summer and cut down the tree. This is known as koroshi-kaki, from the word korosu meaning to kill. In post-war Japan, such as small yield was deemed insufficient for the amount of land and time it required and the labor-intensive nature of this work in the mountains, almost learning to the end of urushi-kaki as a profession. Furthermore, because urushi trees can cause rashes upon contact, residents living near the area did not welcome the planting. In 2019, Japan imported a total of 34 tons of urushi, mostly from China, Korea, Taiwan, Vietnam, Thailand, and Myanmar are also among the primary sources. Additionally, small amounts are imported from Hong Kong, Singapore, and Switzerland. Self-sufficiency rate of urushi in Japan is below 5%. Domestically produced urushi in 2019 amounted to 1.9 tons. This is not sufficient to reach the goal of 2.2 tons needed for all repairs and conservation of important cultural structures in the country. Since the decision was made by the Agency of Cultural Affairs, efforts have been made to increase production and there has been a significant rise in yield. However, it is still not enough. Domestic urushi has fallen to a third of the total amount produced at its peak in 1918, which was 6.6 tons. Some production regions produce more than others, and Iwate Prefecture is the largest producer, yielding 1.3 tons. The reliance on imported urushi is not a recent development. A statistic from 1981 shows that 728 tons of urushi was imported and 30 tons produced domestically, resulting in a self-sufficiency rate of 4%. There is a long history of dependence on Chinese lacquer. and its quality has improved through partnerships with Japanese refineries. However, in recent years, Japan has been impacted by the rising cost of Chinese lacquer due to the country's developing economy and increased labor costs, as well as the aging population of workers and lack of success in the lacquer harvesting industry. Here, I would first like to talk about the primary producer of domestic urushi, Iwate Prefecture. Today, Ninohesti in Iwate Prefecture produced over 70% of domestic urushi, and it is harvested in a town called Joboji Machi. This is why urushi produced in Iwate is generally referred to as Joboji urushi. In Joboji, urushi is harvested every year between mid-June to November. Urushi kaki workers in Joboji are considered to have become artisans when they can harvest about 75 kilograms of unrefined urushi from 500 urushi tree annually. Among urushi kaki practitioners, it is said that a drop of urushi is as valuable as a drop of blood. As this saying describes, the task is to carefully collect the sap drop by drop. There are about 30 urushikaki artisans in Joboji. They are responsible for harvesting the majority of domestically produced urushi. Today, movements have started in former urushi production sites to plant trees and harvest lacquer once again. As an example, I would like to introduce the case in the Tamba region of Kyoto Prefecture. Yakuno-cho is located in the northwestern part of Kyoto Prefecture and was known as one of the few production sites of Tamba urushi for many years. Due to its proximity to central Kyoto, a major site for lacquerware production, it supplies high-quality urushi. However, with modernization of the country after World War II, the urushi kaki industry in Tamba became obsolete. In order to preserve the skills passed down from predecessors, Tamba Urushi Production Cooperative was established in 1948 by men known as the last generation of urushikaki artisans in Tamba. As a result, in 1991, Tamba urushikaki was designated intangible folk cultural heritage by Kyoto Prefecture. Even then, for a time, there were no urushikaki artisans in this region. In 2012, a non-profit organization called Tamba Urushi was established, and the revitalization of the industry regained momentum. Currently, 3 urushikaki artisans work to plant and harvest urushi in this area. This program in turn can be divided into 4 main target areas. 1. Planting and maintaining urushi trees. This is to protect urushi trees from wildlife damage over the course of 15 years while they mature. Securing land for planting is also a challenge. 2. Training the next generation of artisans. The aim is to pass down the skill unique to the Tamba region. Younger generations applying to work in the industry from outside the area cannot make a living solely from urushikaki. They require support to find supplemental work in agriculture or other fields. Currently, a government program to encourage migration to rural area known as community reactivating cooperator squad is utilized in Tamba. Those who are eligible receive government subsidies for a 3-year term to migrate and aid in the local revitalization efforts. Thus far, there have been 2 former cooperators who have successfully become urushikaki artisans through the program. 3. Transmission of the cultural value domestic urushi. Because Tamba Urushi is a non-profit, it operates with financial support from the government and the general public. Therefore, it is vital to widely publicize the importance of urushikaki as a valuable cultural asset of the region. 4. Procuring tools. The special metal tools and blades used in urushikaki were once made by traditional metalsmiths. This is another field experiencing difficulty finding successors and speaks of cooperation across different fields within craft. There are also similar projects currently underway in the village of Sonimura, Nara Prefecture. They aim to plant 200 trees every year and plan to begin harvest after 50 years. Finally, I would like to talk about the new possibility of urushi. Colors are mixed into urushi during the refinement process. The fresh sap of urushi trees has a milky white color. When it comes into contact with the air, it oxidizes and turns brown. The traditional black color of lacquer is made from oxidizing the lacquer with iron powder. For reds and greens, pigments are mixed into the lacquer. In recent years, we find new urushi colorways such as pastels, which are not part of the traditional palette. We see urushi products, mostly dishware that is designed to suit contemporary lifestyles and settings. This trend plays a role in increasing awareness urushi among a wide range of age groups. The antibacterial nature of urushi has also garnered attention. According to research conducted by the Kyoto Lacquerware Craft Cooperative and Research Institutions in Japan, it was found that a population of E. coli on urushi lacquerware surface decreased over time and almost completely died out after 24 hours. This research scientifically proves the experiential knowledge of the people in Japan who have been using lacquerware for approximately 9,000 years, not only because of this durability and aesthetic beauty, but also because of its cleanliness. Lastly, I would like to emphasize that the current state of Japan's urushi industry is deeply tied to the maintenance of artisan culture and the natural environment required to produce urushi and protect cultural properties, as it is rooted in the identity of each region. The movement to revitalize urushi production sites can also be seen as a cultural activity of the respective locality. This concludes my presentation. Thank you.
네, 오네하라 선생님 대단히 감사합니다.
Yonehara, thank you very much for your presentation. Japan is one of the representative countries that have been leading the lacquer culture. And recently, due to the pressure on supply of the sap of lacquer, I do know that it's been facing many challenges. And we can see that Japan is no exception in terms of procuring the raw materials. And he has also mentioned about some alternatives. Thank you very much for your presentation.
I would like to hear from Trieu Can Tien, Deputy Dean of Painting Faculty, Vietnam University of Fine Arts, on Vietnam lacquer painting, a link between Oriental lacquer crafts tradition and Western plastic art value. Mr. Tien is currently teaching, but he's also an artist himself. So we'll now like to hear from
Hello everyone, can you hear me? So it is my great honor to participate in this international seminar. And my topic is about Vietnamese lacquer paintings, a link between the Oriental lacquer craft traditions and Western plastic art value. So for my presentations, the contents include the three main things. First of all, is a brief history of Vietnamese lacquer art. And secondly, is a personal lacquer research. Is my own research about lacquer. And finally, some points about lacquer art education in Vietnam, especially in my universities at present. So I come to the first theme, is the reported Vietnamese lacquer art. As you know, Vietnam is said to be very unique countries who have the lacquer paintings, which is developed very well there. So in Vietnam, before the 15th century, we have the lacquer crafts. We didn't have the lacquer craft before the 15th century, but from the 15th centuries until the 19th centuries, we have the crafts lacquer, and as an influence from the Chinese craft. And after that, in the early 20th century, we had the lacquer painting, which also relates from the lacquer craft. So back to the history of the Vietnamese, all these relics of Vietnamese lacquer. So there is some exhibits excavated from Tuy Nguyen district, Hải Phòng province in 1961. It indicates that the Vietnamese lacquer is like has a tradition of around 2,800 years, and it belongs to Đông Sơn cultures, around 700 to 500 years before Christ. And the exhibit discovers as a proof of the beginning of Southeast Asian early metalwork culture, and the very first person used sap to collect from the lacquer tree to make the lacquer ware according to the needs of their daily life. And more interesting, the exhibit is accommodated from some wooden coffins in Vietnam, in Hải Phòng, when makes a comparison with some lacquer relics by Ishikawa prefectures in Japan. There are some similarities in terms of color pigment. And Chen Lu, also known as Chen Thong Kong, he was born in the 1470s. Is considered the father of the lacquer industry in Vietnam. As a Mandarin of the Lê Dynasty, he studied Chinese lacquers in the business trip to China and returning to Vietnam and his homeland in Binh Bong. He brought back the technique and teach the Vietnamese to make the lacquer ware. With some image of the Vietnamese lacquer craftsmen in the 19th century. And this some tools for making the brown and transparent lacquer from the raw lacquer. And this is an image and the photos of the lacquer craft village in the century. It's called Nam Ngư Lacquer Village. And the Vietnamese lacquer industry developed during the Licheng dynasty as a decorative art, mainly connect with Buddhism. And during the Nguyen dynasty, lacquer is gained popularity as it became accessible to daily life demand. So these are some lacquer ornaments of the Vietnamese lacquer craft. Is very connected to the daily life and to the Buddhism. And this the one of the very first painting, lacquer paintings of Vietnam. The painting is by some artisans. depicts King Nilamde and his wife. This is in the 18th century. And nowadays, a little in the north of Vietnam, there's a lot of lacquer craft which very famous, not only in Vietnam but all over the world. And these are some image of the Chen Mi craft village, and the village specialized in the mother of pearl elite product. So you can see the techniques is very elaborate, very skillful, and the artisan they can perform very skillful technique. And this is some final product. Another village is in near the Hanoi, in the north of Vietnam, is Ha Thai, which is very famous for the lacquer products. These are some galleries in the village displaying the product. As about the very lacquer trees, it has the scientific name, the Rusacendena, and this kind of trees is very elastic. It's not as hard as the Japanese urushis, but it has a very high transparent, and it's very shiny when doing the top layer for making the last steps of the lacquer process. And these some photos of the lacquer forest in Phu Thọ province, which is known one of the most famous province for lacquer trees in Vietnam. And more interestingly, from my trip to Taiwan last 2 years, so I found out that the lacquer trees in Taiwan had the same root with the Vietnamese lacquer, and it's called Annam lacquer. It's originally come from the Vietnam. And these are some of the methods that the lacquer artisans, the farmer, use to measure the qualities of the lacquer. So after getting the sap, they burn the lacquer, and when the water evaporates, so only the lacquer proportion remain. So by this way, you can measure the quality of the lacquer. And in general, the Vietnamese raw lacquer, the proportion is around 72.5 degrees of lacquer. And unlike other countries, for the Vietnamese, it's like Japanese, we have the urushikaki. So in Vietnam, we have the same, but the method is quite different. We didn't mix the lacquer immediately, but we put the raw lacquers in some container and put it for a long time, so around 1 to 2 months. So after a long time like that, the lacquer begins separate in separate layers. So the top layer, it means the highest quality. So this top layer we use to making the transparent and the black lacquer, while the lower part, which is lower quality, we use for making lacquer panel. This is some image of the harvesting the lacquers in Vietnam, and some too. And we have the method is quite different from Japan. We make it in the V leather, and we put some tool like this, and after that we harvest the lacquer. So these are some photos that illustrate the traditional methods of making the transparent lacquer, the black lacquers, and how to filter the lacquer. And this is the process of the normal process of making lacquer. So from the first step, final step, and the most interesting thing is the Vietnamese lacquer is the sanding process. So we come back to the very important dates of Vietnamese lacquer development is in 1925. It is the foundations of the Indochina Fine Arts College, and this coincides with the birth of the Vietnamese lacquer painting. Because in Vietnam, in this time, Vietnam was under the rules of the French. So the French established an occupation in Hanoi, and they formed this the very first college in Indochina. And these are some photos of that period. And it's one of the artisans who teaching the student to making brown lacquer in the 1930s. And there's some samples for the technique exercise by the students of the very first course of the Indochina's Art College. And this image of the very first director is Victor Takier, and he's a very important person that bring the Western academy training into the Vietnamese fine art, and like perspectives, anatomy, human figure for drawings, and like that. So this is the styles of the Indochina style. And here's the very first lacquer artist of the very first generation of the student in 1925. There is one a very important person. She is a French professor, Alex Aimé. She is the very first professor to teach the Vietnamese art student the technique of lacquer. And Alex Aimé is said to be a scholar. She travels a lot to Japan, to Thailand, and to some Southeast Asian country. So she absorbed a lot of the lacquer technique from many countries. So when come back to Vietnam, he tried to apply the techniques in the painting, and she is the right person to inspire the students to apply the lacquer technique of the lacquer craft into painting. So look at some of Alex Aimé painting. We can find some similarities in terms of the Japanese techniques like Hakue, Hirotogi Dashi, and Hiramaki. And the next generations proved that there is a lot of influence from the Japanese lacquer, also the Japanese styles in the lacquer. And in addition to lacquer painting, Vietnamese also have the engraved lacquer, which is very famous all over the world. And I'd like to show you some of the very first very famous masters of the Vietnamese lacquer paintings. And Nguyen Gia Chi is said to be the most famous lacquer artist of Vietnam, and his masterpiece now is collected in the Vietnam Fine Art Museum. As another artist is very famous is Phạm Hậu. It's one of his lacquer painting with title to the Wind of Summer. And another artist Lê Quốc Lộc, and it's the same style. And some artists even try to just sculptures or reliefs or mosaic. He tried to make the surface much more bigger and more higher than the flat surface. And recently, in some auctions in Christie, in Hong Kong, some artists of the Indochina time got a very high price for his masterpiece, just like when artists Nguyễn Tiên Trung and Hoàng Thị Chu with this painting. And this one of the very famous paintings by artist Phạm Hậu, and he's got a very great price in the recent auctions in Hong Kong. So it means that from the Vietnamese lacquer crafts exactly is developed from the 15th century to the 19th century. But from the 1932, we start the Vietnamese lacquer painting, and it's a very important changing point of the Vietnamese lacquer's history, because in that time the trend of the lacquer painting is much more dominant, and in meanwhile the craft start losing its power. And back to the history of lacquer painting, the interesting thing that from the 15th century, we had influence from the Chinese lacquer crafts. But in the 60s of the 20th century, there is some Chinese students come to Vietnam and to my university to study lacquer. And this he's a Kai Kejen is now a very famous lacquer artist in China. And after graduation, he come back to China, and he start teaching lacquer painting technique to the Chinese. And he sums up the graduation's artworks during the times in Vietnam. And more interesting now, one of his painting is this exhibit at the University Museum. This is one of his paintings remaining now. So it looks very Vietnamese. The style is very Vietnamese. So I make a chart so you can see the exchange, the interaction between the Vietnam and China in terms of the lacquer exchange history. And now it's some Vietnamese contemporary lacquer painting, is a very famous contemporary artist. And they start making a much more rough and surface, a much more modern.
교수님, 발표 중에 죄송하지만 시간이 제약이 있기 때문에 조금 줄여주시겠습니까? 나머지 발표에 대해서 조금 간명하게 발표해 주십시오.
Okay.
네, 부탁드립니다.
Okay. I can maybe I will temporarily stop it now because it might be a long presentation later. I don't think that time is enough for the other. Okay, maybe temporarily stop here so to let the other. Okay. Thank you for listening. Yeah, that's the history of the Vietnamese lacquer painting. Yeah. Thank you.
아유, 감사합니다.
Okay, thank you.
좋은 내용을 많이 담고 계시는데 저희가 조금 강제로 줄일 수밖에 없어서 죄송한 말씀드리고요.
We unfortunately had to ask you to summarize a little bit at the end, and we are very sorry for that. So in Vietnam, we were able to see that they're using traditional materials, lacquer, in various different ways. And in fact, this development of lacquer paintings in a very contemporary way, that was very interesting to see. If you would like to speak a little bit later, then we can maybe hear your thoughts in the discussion session.
The next presentation is by Professor Kian from the Mandalay University. The title of his presentation is Myanmar Lacquerware and Its Prospects. Our speaker is a historian and is deeply involved in research in Myanmar's ICH. We also have a pre-recorded video by the professor. Yes, so let us watch the video.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great pleasure to be video conferencing as I'm given a chance to present my paper on this very auspicious day. I am Cho Suen-Yong, professor of Mijina University. Before I begin presentation, I would like to make a request. If you have any question to ask concerning my presentation, please give them to me in writing at chat box or email so that I can fully understand your questions and give a reply. I also want to keep your question in record and use them to improve my further study. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, the topic that I'm going to present today is Myanmar lacquerware and its prospects. I would like to present the objective of my paper. There are 3 points. I would like to continue the hypothesis on this paper was conducted by the paranormal method. Related data were collected through some published data. First of all, I would like to share a little background on lacquerware. There is a long history of Myanmar liquor. Scholars have presented various aspects about liquor, though there is very little discrepancy in the discrimination of Myanmar liquor production process. There is a wide divergence of opinion regarding the origin of Myanmar Liquor Act. Many people have three opinions on Myanmar liquor. These three perspectives are fully described in my paper. I don't talk about time anymore. In my opinion, none of these opinions are general, not based on solid evidence, because they are either biased or too far-fetched. One cannot say when the Burma began to know about this industry. Anyway, the Shukun Pagoda inscription inscribed in 1223 AD is the earliest available evidence of Myanmar liquor. So, there is no denying that Myanmar liquor has existed since Pagan period, and then it gradually developed through the age of Taungu, Inwa, and Nyangya, reaching zenith in Kombong period. Bagan period liquor lacks decorative painting and beds were of only plain black. In Inwa period, there were paintings began to appear on lacquerware. During the Nyangya period, on the surface of lacquerware were engraved with a 5-iron stylus. In Komong period, the adult lacquerware developed to Shui Zawa called gold leaf lacquerware. The gold leaf relief more lacquerware and Mansi Shui Cha glass and gold inlay lacquerware. I will continue to discuss the liquor industry and protection. There are 33 liquor villages in Myanmar. The details are provided in the paper. In fact, liquor was not even used during the monarchical period, but only later. If we look at the protection of liquor, we can see that there are 4 types and classes. 4 types are rare object, rigid object, personal ornaments, and musical instruments. 4 classes are these Poto. Poto 1 is Shizawa, Poto 2 is horsehair liquor, Poto 3 is original reason, and Poto 4 is Japan liquor called Seiyon. There are 4 classes of liquor in relation to quality and value. First class is Shizawa, gold liquor. Second class is horsehair liquor. Third class is ordinary liquor. Fourth class is Seiyon called Japan liquor. I would like to continue to introduce the main ingredient in liquor. Business material used in the production of liquor are bamboo or wood. Horsehair, this is called resin. Nauchi called condom. Amethyl called meat bone. Clay, vermilion, yellow opium, indigo, gold plate, engine chalk mold called engine stone powder, Tanausi, acacia gum, tamasi, neem gum, and charcoal. Next, there are 11 steps to present the business liquor business. First, cutting bamboo near the joint. Carved into bamboo pieces. At that, tips of bamboo slab are cut off to be equal. Fourth, cutting of joint. Fifth, splitting bamboo slab into strips. Sixth, dividing tips of bamboo strips. 7. Trimming bamboo strip into long trim strips. After long, elegant strip of bamboo are cut. It is to make 4 kinds of business material. These are 1. Making coin object. 2nd, making woven object. 3rd, making toast object. And 4th, making body object. Liquor were usually decorated in 5 colors, such as black for resin, red for mercury sulfide, yellow for cedar, blue for mayne or indigo, and green for mixed resin and cedar. Tisik or resin is the essential material in the liquor industry. According to the design on the business far phrase, Myanmar means absolute. There are 6 types of liquor. Firstly, I would like to present ordinary liquor. Myanmar means yo-yo-yum. Ordinary liquor is made of both bamboo and wood. Only black and red are used for ordinary liquor, especially home appliances and common objects for region are ordinary liquor. Secondly, Let me tell you about the stylix liqueur. Nyama means Kenyuyong. Red or black liqueur draw a design without pattern with a stylus. If a design is a skilled worker, we cannot predict the beginning and end of the collection. The design for floral, picture, landscape, and body stories drew on the plain liqueur with stylus and then at the color. Thirdly, let's talk about Shizawayo. The liqueur decorated with gold leaf is called kit liqueur. The required pattern is drawn on the black liqueur material and added with a mixture of neem gum and yellow opium powder. After applying the resin on elastic objects, a fixed gold leaf. Today, this is the most expensive liqueur. Due to the price of gold, several Asian temples and monasteries in our country have wall and ceiling cover with panel or Shizwa work. As a whole, I would like to about the yo-yo. The yo-yo is made by mixing tissue or resin with the yo. The yo is made of green rose the bone to a fine powder. According to Dr. Kamonyo, the yo-yo have originated in China around 7th and 11th century. However, it is said to have disappeared during the Ming Dynasty. At present, that kind of liqueur is still being made in Bagan. As a fifth, I would like to talk about glass mosses and gate liqueur. It is very delicate and expensive due to the six of adhesion and amount of time and labor involved. The required pattern is a fixed color glass and gate on the blacks, fabrics or liqueur. This type of liqueur can be found through slide, cover or folding manuscript and pen leaf manuscript, drum circle or orchestra, OV and xylophone, shrine and contour, etc. As a sixth, I would like to talk about drawing liqueur image so-called Mampia. In making drawing liqueur image, was first mold the image in clay or bamboo wicker work. Then the mold image was to apply with a coat of straw, ash and water, mixed root and taverns or elder, a way to be soaked with liquor and to rub the mold with these clothes repeatedly, and then cotton or cloth soaked with liquor is applied layer by layer repeatedly, making release figure with hollow. The earliest mafia in Myanmar was dated September 10, 1765 in Yongan, Putalin Township. There is another mafia dated December 2nd, 1772 at Pindaya Yang Monastery. May I continue to discuss about production process? First step is business material. There are three business types of liquorware made of bamboo. First step, wrap thin bamboo round the coil, called rope. Example, flower pot, yidagol, downland, bowl cover, etc. Second type, no three thin bamboos together and coil. Example, petal box, water cap, rice bowl, etc. Third type, weaving the necessary pattern with very thin bamboo, example, small object or material. As a second step, the business material is coated with resin. It is called the yokai, in English grounding. After coated tissue, it is kept the basement for 3 days. In order to obtain such a good black material, it is necessary to enter and is the basement 5 times. The liquor is smoked and polished with stone powder. Then it is rubbed with thick charcoal powder to make it finer. When it is polished, the inside of liquor is painted red with a mixture of wood resin and vermilion. It is said that the inside of most liquor is painted. Please continue about engraving, etching, and coloring. The outline of the design is engraved freehand on the surface of each item. This work is usually done only by men. Women are less active. The part of the design that are meant to be red paint mixed with resin and vermilion are further etched on the surface. It kept to dry in the basement for 3 days, and then the liquid is rubbed with well-raised hooks. After that, it is applied with acacia gum or neem gum to design a color and dry in the open air. When it dries, it is outlined in green color using Stylex. After that, it is applied to the wood and rubbed in a cloth to keep it clean and left in the basement for 5 days. After 5 days, the necessary color are painted. As painting was operated by only women, men cannot be found painting work. If I say about painting, 4 basic styles of traditional Myanmar painting are used. These are Kano, Kapi, Gaza, and Neri. Details are provided in my paper. After talking about the history and production stage of varnish, I would like to talk about the local work market. There are many types for selling the local work, especially Pagoda Festival and shop. Some are sold through traders or merchants. 3 classes of sellers are manufacturer and customer supply on local work. Second type, self-produce and self-distribute. Third type, purchase through manufacturer and sellers. Today, the rich men are opening stores with production. Before concluding, let's talk about the potential of the liquor industry. Both the number of liquor villages and the number of liquor workers has dwindled. The main problem is that raw material is scarce. There is no market, so there are few people interested in making a living, and there is not enough capital. In addition, disposable items are available. Long-lasting products are being replaced. This shows that as technology advances, some cultures are being swallowed up. So, when we think about how we are going to maintain it, it is necessary to form a local work business association systematically. Banks must be able to lend at low interest rate to those who want to run a local business. We must try to attract people who want to study at the local school systematically. You need to be able to create markets and local raw materials in a timely manner. If we work together, the ICH list liquor culture was less. In conclusion, there is no denying that the Myanmar liquor industry has flourished since Began era. What I want to present here, we must remember that culture has no boundaries. No culture has emerged and cannot stand. Cultural exchange will continue to exist, even if there are natural or man-made barriers between countries. Because of this fact, there is historical evidence that identical forms and experience of one culture are emerging not only in one country but in many countries at the same time. Therefore, I think some of the cultural characteristics of a country are very similar to those of neighboring countries. Especially now, the liquor work culture has to be preserved. Let me end my presentation by urging all parties to work together systematically for this. Thank you very much for your participation.
대단히 감사합니다. 미얀마의
Yes, thank you very much for your presentation. I had a lot of questions that I wondered. I wanted to know more about Myanmar's lacquer culture. Thank you very much for that very detailed presentation. And particularly, the last note was on collaboration and cooperation with other countries. And thank you very much for that as well. Once again, thank you very much for your presentation. Let us move on to the last presentation of the day.
Our final presenters are Zaha Ahmed from the National Center for Cultural Heritage in the Maldives and Abdul Mateen Abdul Reem, a lacquer craftsman. So one person is from a school or from the heritage section of the National Center, and the other is an artist. We will hear.
Thank you very much and good morning. I'm Zaha and I'll be presenting lacquer work in the Maldives, the best surviving craftsmanship from the early days. And I'll be presenting with Martin, who has been practicing this craft for 15 years. So before going into detail on the presentation, these are the parts that we're looking into, the significance of lacquer work in the Maldives and how live till today, and also how the legislative protection is given for lacquer work, and lastly, what are the challenges we're facing and how we are trying to overcome them. In Maldives, we do not have a written history before the conversion of Islam, 1153 AD, but various archaeological sites and heritage sites evidence that the country is inhabited over 2,000 years. And from the 2019 published Cultural Heritage Tentative List, we have got 462 sites buildings, which is located over the nation, and the cultural heritage sites range from pre-Islamic period prior to 1153 to late modern period of British control after 5. And the vast range of cultural heritage indicate different eras of the history and also portrays the early Bulgarians' lifestyle, fashion, and in ancient time, Maldives was considered to be a famous transit point for the people traveling from east to west and vice versa. So there have been a lot of instances that are seen from the heritage sites and archaeological sites that we share from those influences. And lots of work have been wrote and in historical studies, it shows that lacquer work may have been brought to Maldives during the period when trade between China, Japan, and the rest of South Asia flourished. But among all the lacquer work seen in the country, the most significant are what we are seeing in the closed mosques of the Maldives. And these mosques are usually commissioned by the royals, and the best craftsmen are appointed to do the work in these mosques. And 6 of these milestones are now nominated in the tentative list of UNESCO World Heritage. And the interior of these mosques are decorated using lacquer, and this gives a bold statement of how significant lacquer work is for the Maldives. This is how the interior of the mosque looks like. You can see the lacquer work done in pillars, beams, and also the different ceilings. And you can see the calligraphy work and different types of designs. But the most mesmerizing of them is the puckered ceiling, where you can find a variety of lacquer designs, different ranges, and the amount of detail is quite amazing. And the lacquer work and interior decoration of these mosques are similar to Myanmar and India. Other than beautifying, it also acts as a protective coating, especially for a country like Maldives, which is a tropical country, so very much prone to the dampness and heat. So having lacquer is a mosque gives it extra protection for these mosques. Lacquer decoration are also applied on kitchen metal and elaborate paint. From the left, you can see a food vessel, which you could find interior lacquer work done. And this vessel is usually used for grand feasts to serve the grand feasts, and also here's an instrument, which is a drum. So this kind of decorative instruments are used in special occasions. We also have observed that numerous lacquer designs decorations are done in a royal residence. This is actually a British palace which belongs to the national hero Muhammad Taqi, and interior of this palace you can find lacquer work done, which also shows how significant lacquer is in Maldives. How did lacquer work manage to survive till today? And there have been many crafts that have been practiced, but crafts like coral carving or coral carpentry or Turkish jewelry making have been stopped due as they were having a negative impact on the environment. And there is a list of crafts like patch weaving and things have changed because of the people's lifestyle has changed over time. Because in earlier days, islands are having a lot of palm trees and tropical vegetation, which is easy access to the raw material. So many of these crafts has been doing due to these reasons. So the next slides will be explained by Martin.
So one reason for the prolonged survival of this craft is that because as raw material and tools need to carry out lacquer is still readily available. In this slide, you will find the pictures of how lacquer work is still being done in the present day. First, the work being by preparing the necessary colors needed for the work. However, these days some colors or used in the lacquer work are improved from abroad. When the desired colors are made, then we roll the raw or lacquer plating and then we cut them into strips. These color strips are used to add color to the object. For any cultural heritage to reach us till the present day, they only happen if they are valued, cherished. It usually is the result of an effort of a group of people who cherish is bring it to the present day. In Maldives, one island called Baitul Tuladu has got the most specialized expert and most number of the people practicing lacquer work. It is believed that the people of this island were able to specialize in this craft because they cherish this work. Moreover, with pride, they transfer this knowledge and skill set to their children and for the future generation to come. And I am very proud that I am from that island and also learn this knowledge and technique from my forefather, and I will try my best to pass this on the future generation. To compare the lacquer work carried out during the earlier time, one could notice that the present day lacquer is some more or less very similar. It is only introduction of few modern equipment additions like the motor and the more range of color that they use in today lacquer work that set them apart from the earlier days. Looking at the slide from left side is the picture taken in 2016 and 2017. And right side is a picture that we got from the National Archives, and you will notice the positioning and then style of the work still remains the same. As I have mentioned earlier, one of the change one can notice is the range unconventional colors that are seen nowadays. As earlier days, it is only red, yellow, and black. But like the picture shown in this slide, you could see that there are now green, blue, pink, and so on. This slide actually showing how our design are engraved after application of lacquer on an object. From your left side is a picture from earlier time, and we got this picture from National Archives, and from the right side you will be see some drawing and engraving work taken during 2016 to 2017. What you will notice is that the technique is similar and the knowledge still remaining in the same and actually preserved and passed on. These are pictures of the recent lacquer work. You will notice that the color is not the traditional, and nowadays new range of products like pens and being introduced. Thank you.
아유 감사합니다. 몰디브에서
Thank you very much. We were able to see how important lacquer craft is in the Maldives.
그리고 무형유산에 특히 오칠 관련 무형유산에
And that you are working tirelessly to try to safeguard this tradition in the Maldives.
안정적인 전송 환경을 갖춘 점이
I think that the fact that you have these villages and you have these communities who are working very actively in the transmission is very inspirational for all of us. We have heard all of the 5 presentations now. I think it was on one theme, but because we are talking from different countries and different traditions, I think the perspectives and the spectrum was very broad. It is important for us to understand each other's differences, but I think it's also very important for us to identify the similarities, a common thread among us all, and I think that is a work that requires extra layer of affection. I think that the fact that we were able to, in Asia, use lacquer in many of our countries, but use it in an appropriate and very wise way that is in keeping with our traditions. And the fact that a lot of these traditions are still alive to this day is very meaningful. In the West, varnish is what they've mostly used, and in Asia, I think the element that was widely used is lacquer. We don't have much time, but we will go straight into the discussion session. I did send you some questions, some common questions early on, and I would like to ask you these questions, and we will go in order of the presentation to respond to these questions. Unfortunately, the doctor from Myanmar, I don't know if he can join us right now, but we will try to do our best to reach him. We would like to ask you to please keep your answers short to within about 1 minute. So the common question that I have for all of you, the first question is, while listening to all of your presentations, you must have identified some similarities between your country and other countries. So can you tell us what were the similarities that you were able to identify? So I'd like to ask the Korean speaker first. Please keep your remarks brief.
네,
Dr.
네,
Lee.
발표 잘
I
들었습니다. 그리고
really enjoy the presentations.
선생님들께서 발표해 주신 어떤 아시아 그 칠기와 이제 한국 칠기의 어떤 공통점이랄까요? 이런 부분들을 생각을 해보게 되면 역시 칠이라는 재료 자체가 상당히 고가이고 다루기 어렵고 그 자체가 상당히 고급 기물 그리고 그 당시에 어떤 최고 기술을 발휘한 어떤 그런 예술품으로서 귀중하게 다루어지고 있고 그것은 과거에도 마찬가지고 오늘날에도 여전히 상당히 어떤
And this is something that was true in all countries as well. That lacquer is still seen as something that is very expensive and very sophisticated. So that for me was very meaningful.
네, 감사합니다. 약속대로 짧게 해주셔서.
Yes, thank you very much for keeping your comments brief and succinct.
일본의 그 유지 오네하라
Mr. Yuji Onehara, would you like to answer the same question, please?
아까 녹화로 발표를
yes, we heard your pre-recorded video and we weren't able to see you in person, but now we can. So before you answer the question, could you briefly introduce yourself?
부탁드립니다.
Hello everyone, I'm Yuji Onehara.
네, 안녕하십니까. 저는 유지 요네하라라고 합니다. 사전 녹화본을
And all presentation very interesting. Thank you very much. 共通点ですけれども、螺鈿の貝であるとか、金箔であるとかですね、漆の装飾に使う材料ですね。これは日本と他の国々も同様だというふうに思いました。で、こうした道具、材料の確保なども、また共に抱えている大きな課題だと感じました。以上です。
So, what I saw as a common thread across all of the presentations was the between other presentations and the case of Japan is the decorative materials such as mother of pearl inlay and gold. Another common issue I saw was the challenges in procuring materials. Thank you.
네, 아유 대단히 감사합니다. 짧게 해주셔서. 네. 혹시 베트남의 그 트리오 쿠엔티엔 교수님, 아까 중간에 그 발표를 제가 끊어서 죄송하고요.
Very sorry that I had to interrupt your presentation, but we will give you more time than the other speakers right now if you could respond to the question.
Hello, everyone. I'm Joe again from Vietnam, and I find it interesting to have listened to and to see the presentations of the participants today. I think in terms of the tradition, we had the same roots that the lacquer spring from the lacquer craft and as its influence from China, but each country is based on its own cultures and development has its own development. Just like in Japan and in Korea. In Japan, you have the ukiyo, the makie is said to be the most special technique of the Japanese. And also, just like in Korea, they have the rare and the mother period lady is said to be very stereotype the Korean orchid lacquer. So in Vietnam, we look back to the traditions of the crafts. In Korea, in the Japanese, we have the same root. That's because of some changes in terms of the society and the histories. So we start inherit the Western tradition from the French, and in that way, we develop the lacquers in our own way. It's much more tend to art, to painting, rather than the craft. But it is obviously that's rise at the early centuries of the 20th century. There are a lot of exchanges in terms of lacquer exchange between the Asian countries like Japan, China, and Korean lacquer. I think we interact each other and we enrich our lacquer tradition based on this exchange. That's all. Thank you.
네, 대단히 감사합니다. 네. 다음에 미얀마
Thank you very much for your comments. I wanted to ask a professor from Myanmar, but I do understand that due to local circumstances, he cannot access the Zoom platform. It's quite unfortunate, and I hope that we can have him reconnect to the platform. And last but not least, our speaker from Maldives, would you like to answer the same question? We have two speakers. Who would you like to answer the question?
I would answer. Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
네, 좋습니다.
After listening to all the presentation, what I understood is, especially from the Korean, the lacquer work was actually done commissioned by the royals, and also it's usually used by the upper family. And I feel that in politics is the similar case. So it's usually done to elaborate the grainness. So we find those similarities from the presentation.
네. 아유, 감사합니다. 예.
Very much.
네, 저는 들으면서 매 발표마다
And as I was listening to all of the presentations, they were quite insightful, and I was able to learn new things, and it was an invaluable opportunity for me. I find this seminar very rewarding. So let me now move on to the second question that was distributed in advance, and if I may read that out to you. The commonalities of the countries, is this based on cultural exchange, or do you believe that it's endogenous? You can answer the individual questions, or whichever way you want. So first, Mr. Lee Jae-ho.
네, 지금 오늘 발표해 주신 베트남 그리고 이제
listening
미얀마
to the
그리고
presentation
이제
from
일본과
Vietnam, from Myanmar, from
몰디브까지 이제
Japan, and also from the
이렇게
Maldives,
이야기를 들어보면서 다시 한번 생각을
I
하게
once again
됐습니다.
thought
이제
to myself
각국의
how
어떤 그
when we look at all of these
호칭
different
문화는 그 시작
countries,
시점도 그렇고 그다음에 이제
the
그 여러 가지
traditions
어떤
started
현상을
at
보면
different time periods,
베트남의 경우에는
and the
중국으로부터
phenomenon are a little
직접
bit
그 기술과
different.
어떤
In the
재료
case of
수급에 대한
Vietnam,
어떤 그런
they
것들을 그
came
아까
by a lot
발표에서도
of the
직접 이제
tradition from
받아들이셨다고
China,
들었지만
and the
그렇기
Chinese
때문에 상당히
influences
교류라는
were very
부분이 상당히
significant
큰
on
역할,
Vietnam.
큰
So I think
어떤
that for
그
all of our
동질성의
countries,
바탕이 되고 있다라는
this
걸 다시
element
한번
of
느꼈습니다.
exchange, cultural
하지만 이제
exchange,
그
has
시작
been
시점들이 이제
important
각각
for
다
all of us.
다르고
But
그리고
the starting points
그런
of when
어떤
this occurred
기술을
are different
주변에 있는
depending on the
나무로부터
country.
어떤 그 자연에 대한 지식
So I think that really the real origin of this craft is our knowledge of nature, that many of the artisans, regardless of where they lived, had this knowledge of nature, and while it occurred in different time periods, they all had this knowledge of nature to ground them in learning more about lacquerware within this boundary of Asia, and to really develop this craft and this artistic culture here in this continent. Thank you very much.
유지 오네하라 선생님께도 같은
Yes,
질문을
Mr. Yuji
드리겠습니다.
Onera, the same question to you as
そう
well.
ですね、漆はとても優秀な、塗料ですので、それぞれの国でそれぞれの国に合った使われ方をしているというふうに感じました。生活文化ですね。途中でちょっと一回どうぞ。
I felt that as urushi is a very adaptable material, and I heard from your presentations that it was being used in ways that were appropriate for each of these regions and countries.
日本の人たちにとって、多分一番、身近な漆のものは、お箸です。毎日使うお箸を、木で、作ることが多いですけれども、ここに漆を塗ることで耐久性が増したりとか、します。そうしたその地域ならではの生活様式に、他の国々でも取り入れられていると。例えば、他の国の皆さんの発表で見せていただいたお椀の大きさは、食生活そのものを、表しているというふうに感じました。以上です。
And for people in Japan, the most common urushi lacquer product is hashi or chopsticks. And it's something that people here use daily and improves durability as well. And I saw in your presentations the different sizes of bowls or utensils or vessels. And I felt that the sizing also reflected the lifestyles of each place. Thank you.
대단히 감사합니다.
Thank you very much.
베트남 쪽에도
We would like to hear
같은
from
질문을 드리겠습니다.
Dr. Tien now.
네, 트리오 쿠엔틴 교수님.
I agree to the speech by the two previous participants from the Koreans and the Japan, because lacquer is said to be a very important material, and it very connects to the human's culture. During my PhD study course of urushi in Japan, I had a lot of chance to participate in many international symposiums, and including some chopstick international festival in Korea. And I found it interesting for the Chinese, the Koreans, and the Japanese. You actually have a very interesting traditions of the chopstick made by lacquer. Then in Vietnam we have the same in the past, but unfortunately, recently it's because of many reasons. So the lacquer crafts doesn't develop so well, because nowadays it seems that from the lacquer paintings comes up. So we changed the concept, and nowadays people more prefer the painting to the craft. So that's the resource coming problem in Vietnam, to how to safeguarding to the lacquer crafts industry is the matter. But I hope that through the exchange and through the cooperation like this, we can improve our our opinions, our concept of the true lacquer. Yeah, that's it.
대학에서 오체를 회화적 영역으로
Thank
이렇게
you.
발전시키는
In the universities, it's true that lacquer was expanded into the painting sphere, but there are also various examples of this as a culture in the everyday life. I believe it's the same case in in Vietnam.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
다음 이제 마지막으로
Last but not least, I would like to ask Mr. Cha Ahmed the same question.
Sorry.
다시 질문을 드릴까요? 아까 공통 질문으로 예, 그
common question to all.
여러 가지 이제 그 공통
We
정보를
see,
들으시면서 느낀
Listening to the presentation,
Yes, thank you very much. What we have noticed that is the technique and the skills
저희가
might be shared from the other countries like China or Myanmar. But what we notice is in the religious, the designs are unique to the country. Like in motifs, we have seen the calligraphy work and the floral and powder designs. It's the same designs between floral stones are again seen in the lacquer work. That is one of the things. Even though that we share the techniques and knowledge, the designs become unique to each country.
제가 일부러 차이에 대해서는 이제 가급적
Thank
언급을
you.
안
I
했고
did
가급적
not
공통
note
부모가
about
뭘까
the
우리가
differences,
동질성을
but I
함께
wanted to focus more
확인할
on
수
the
있는 그런
commonalities
뭔가를
to understand the common
이제
thread
질문을
that goes through all of
이제
these cultures.
저희가 이번 주제의
Because
어떤
I
그
felt
기획 취지이기도
that
해서
that
그렇다는
was
걸
all the more well
미리 또
aligned
다시
to
한번
the
또
purpose of today's
말씀을 드립니다.
seminar. So I just wanted to remind you the reason why I was
네,
focused on the
그 답변을
commonalities.
감사드리고요.
Once again, thank you very much for your comments
세
and
번째 공통
answers.
질문도 제가 드린 바가 있습니다.
I also had a
질문을
third question,
좀 다시 상기시켜드리면
and if I may remind you once
다른
again,
문화권과의 공통점을 살피는
the third
연구가
question is
연구자 개인이나
whether the
또
research
자국의
on the
문화에서
commonalities
어떤
of the
의미를 가지거나
cultures, what kind of
또 앞으로
implications
가질
does that
것으로
have on the
예측되는지
researcher and
예,
on the
각자의
culture
견해를
of
말씀해
the
주시면
researcher?
감사하겠습니다.
Could you give us some information or
한국부터
any
해볼까요?
light on that? Let us
이제부터는.
start with Mr. Lee Jae of Korea.
이제 최근에 이제 각종 전시나
I think that recently we've seen a lot of exhibitions, and I think there's a market now, an expanded market for foreign international handicrafts, and this has led to an increased interest in Asian lacquerware in general compared to the past. And in my presentation today, or listening to all of the different experts' presentations, I was able to understand that the different countries have similarities and also differences in how they use the material, how they use lacquer. I think that that knowledge can also inspire the actual craftsmen, the artisans who are working in the field. A lot of the traditional knowledge and skills that are being practiced and transmitted in Korea right now, they date back to pre-modern times or modern times in Korea that we've really learned from China or Japan and etc. But now perhaps there would be maybe some new types of techniques or skills that we can identify, and these new types of skills and techniques can be something that we Asian researchers can work on together. So we don't need to necessarily be mired into the history, but we can try to come up with contemporary techniques as well.
자, 다음은 일본
Yes, thank you. From Japan, Mr. Yuji Yonehara.
そうですね。日本では工芸として漆が使われます。で、今日いろいろご発表いただいたように、美術の材料として使われる、あるいは宗教の材料として使われる、そういった意味で漆は同じような使い方をしながらも非常に多展開な素材だというふうに思います。 こうした一つの素材を話題にしながら、違いを確認し合うというのはとても大切な作業だというふうに感じます。最後に一つ、漆は高い抗菌性を持っている素材でもあります。そうした意味でも、今後、このアジア以外の地域から、塗料としての要望は多いのではないかなというふうにも感じますので、またこうした機会を多く持って、漆の研究を深められたらいいなと、そういうふうに感じました。以上です。ありがとうございます。
So in Japan, urushi is used mostly in the field of craft and in arts and religious items as well. And seeing that in other countries, lacquer is used in similar ways but has seen different various developments. I just wanted to make one last point about the antibacterial properties of lacquer, and I imagine that this could lead to kind of a future demand from other regions and areas for lacquer. And I think it's important to continue deepening this research as scholars in this field. Thank you.
네, 감사합니다. 자, 베트남
Thank you very much.
예,
Dr.
교육대
Tien, Drew Can Tien.
부탁드립니다.
Okay, can you hear me? Yeah. Yeah, I think it's through the deeper research about the lacquer, we can widen the worlds of lacquers original circle together. Because each country is based on iteration has it's a very special technique. So from the fields of the lacquer, the painting artist, when I come back to our craft tradition, I found that we have a very interesting tradition of lacquerware, and it was similar to Korea's lacquers in Japan. And even recently in Vietnam, there are lots of the exchange activities and sponsor and support by the government try to improve the developments of the lacquer craft village. And we hope that by the sponsor from the government, we can bring back the traditional lacquer technique, because that is missing now in Vietnam.
네, 감사합니다.
Yeah.
몰디브 쪽의 답변을 좀 짧게 부탁드릴까요?
In Maldives, the lacquer work is, as mentioned in our presentation, usually practiced by the locals in an island. So I believe if the practitioner is given more exposure to participate in, like in this seminar, they would get the opportunity to exchange the knowledge. And if the researchers and the policy makers work closely, I think it will have a much more effective results on doing the research work about lacquer. So I think it's time we work together to the research. Thank you.
예, 감사합니다. 네, 시간이 좀 많이 지났습니다만은 예정
I
시간을
believe we are behind schedule, but there is one last question that I wanted to pose. I believe that the final destination, basically that we aspire to fulfill, would be this following question. And all of our participants can answer, or if not just some, that would be enough. But we've been looking into the value of lacquer. But I would like to ask, what do you think about a joint inscription of this lacquer art to the representative list of the ICH of Humanity? Are you willing to take part in a joint inscription of lacquer? So first, maybe from Korea, any views?
네, 말씀하신 것처럼
Yes, so this lacquerware culture and lacquer culture, if this can be filed as a multinational nomination as a shared, cultural heritage. Obviously, that would be great. And if I could play a role, I would gladly do so. Lacquerware itself, it involves a process of making. The production process is very wide and very broad, and there are very specific elements, very specific techniques. And as Professor Yonehara said, it's used in different areas. So in forestry, and you have to get the sap, and you have to refine it, and you have to create actual products out of it. And it's a very long, very intricate process. So if different Asian countries can study that, research that together, and then submit a multinational filing, that will be very meaningful. Thank you very much. Professor Yonehara?
はい、賛同します。今、D 先生おっしゃったように、私も賛同します。で、漆はですね、加工方法も、使用方法ももちろんですけれども、今日私発表しましたように、漆を取るためのプロセスというのは、自然環境につながっています。あるいは、住宅開発等の大きな、視点に関わっています。ですので、その状況というのは、日本、今回この参加されたどの国も同じだと思いますので、人の暮らしとか地域の文化をしっかりと守りながら、漆を残していくと、そういった共通の観点というのは持てるというふうに考えます。以上です。
I also fully support this suggestion. Urushi, as Professor Lee mentioned, that urushi processing methods vary widely. And in terms of the harvesting method of urushi, this is something that is connected to urbanization of the land and forestry and environmental concerns as well. So I can see this being a common objective, and this shared need to protect where people's lives and land in relation to urushi.
감사합니다. 네. 그러면 몰디브부터 먼저 대답을.
We will hear from the Maldives side.
베트남에 대해서는 다른 질문과 묶어서
And I actually have another question for our Vietnam experts. I'm going to ask you to wait a little bit so we can hear from Zaha first.
Thank you. I think we fully support, and ICH is an area that in Maldives we are very new, because we have always been concentrating on the tangible cultural heritage. So looking at other presentation, I think we have a long way to go into the research and the lacquer work. We need to understand more. And I think if we get the opportunity, it will be very good if we can do the lacquer work of Maldives in an international level and show that we also share these commonalities with other countries. Thank you.
네, 대단히 감사합니다. 예, 좋은 답변들 감사드립니다. 예,
Thank you all for your comments and answers. So our professor from Vietnam, I have the same question plus another question. I know that we're out of time, so we cannot go around the table, but I do know that there are more than 100 online participants joining us, and we have about 50 joining from overseas. And there was a question amongst those posed by our participants.
So in 1925, as you mentioned, this Indochina University, the Fine Arts University that you mentioned, that was established at the time. And that was really where the tradition of lacquer paintings really flourished. So the question is, were there no lacquer paintings before this university was established?
Actually, in Vietnam, the lacquer painting is means to be is coincide with the establishment of the Indochina Fine Arts College. It's one of the very interesting parts of the Vietnamese lacquer arts history, because before that time, before 1925, we have the lacquers in terms of lacquer crafts mainly, and at other times the Chinese, the French use good terminology to use specific the Vietnamese craft lacquer. They call the anamid lacquer. Yeah. It's like urushi is the name to call the Japanese lacquer. So until the foundations of the college and from around 1 decade from 1925 to 1932. So there is a lot of experimentals. So the very first generations are students in cooperation with some high ranks like artisan tries many times to invent a kind of lacquer. We call the transparent lacquer, and in the Vietnamese terminology it's called kangsan. This kind of lacquer is actually from the raw lacquer, but we add some cementite in, so it makes the lacquer become more transparent and it's much easier to sand. So it's very compatible with the lacquer painting. Yeah.
Yes, can you also tell us your thoughts about the multinational nomination?
Yeah.
네, Can you also tell us your thoughts on multinational nomination?
Sorry, the signal is not quite clear. Yes. I think that is, English speaking, is my great honor to participate in the ICHCAP because it's the very first time for me to participate in such a seminar like this. But through the presentations of the participants, I'm totally believe that with the commonalities, the multi-cross, the lacquer, we contribute as multi-language. Because in terms of process, and no matter where it's Korean, China, or Myanmar or Vietnam, we have the same process of doing the lacquer product, from the harvesting the resin to the process of making a lacquer's artwork. So I quite believe that through the cooperation and through the academic collaboration, we can strengthen the lacquer world, and we can have a lot of benefits from the mental knowledge sharing.
예, 대단히 감사합니다. 소중한 답변 감사합니다.
Yeah.
Valuable
Thank you.
opinions.
토론을 진행하다 보면
Yeah.
늘 시간의 그 부족.
When we do engage in discussions, time is always not enough, and today was no exception. We want to know, we want to learn more, but time is always lacking, and the online environment is also very challenging. However, I believe that the presentations and the discussions were very sincere, and that we achieved a lot. We were able to understand the value of commonality, that common thread, and also about confirming this value. I think that this is something that was in desperate need, and I believe that we are all on the same page, and thank you very much for your views on this. This was a very first step towards that commonality, but I think that this could be a very good opportunity for further research. Once again, thank you very much for your participation, and let me now pass the mic to our MC, our moderator. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone, including speakers,
Thank you.
moderator, and audience. We really appreciate you being here. And this seminar will continue online tomorrow at the same time, so please check ICHCAP's website for further information. Thanks again for joining us today, and I hope to see you all tomorrow at the same time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye bye. Sayonara.
아이고 수고들 하셨습니다.